Hello, and welcome to the Quietly Visible podcast. I'm your host, Carol Stewart, founder of Abounding Solutions and author of Quietly Visible Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman. And this is the podcast for introverted women who want to thrive as leaders and in life. And today's guest is Beatrice Kabutakapua. And she's a storytelling coach, but she's going to tell you a bit more about herself and what she does. And our conversation is one which I know that you will be very interested in listening to, because we're going to be talking about how people often confuse introversion with shyness. And we're going to be talking about storytelling and how you can use storytelling to be more influential and be more impactful as leaders. So, hello, Beatrice, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Carol. Hi.
Hi, it's great to have you here. So tell us a bit about who Beatrice is, who you are and
Ooh.
what you do.
The big who are you question. So I'll give my professional intro and I'll give my mission-based intro. And
Hmm.
in terms of how I present myself, people will see that I work as a business storytelling coach. I am the CEO and founder of a company called the Business Storytelling Center. And what we do is really helping leaders to tell their stories, basically, whether it's for their team, whether it's for themselves, whether it's for the company that they work with. That's what we do. We coach them, we train them, and we make sure that their storytelling skills start from their own skills and their own lived experience rather than something that comes from someone else, rather than something that comes from outside. And in terms of the mission, what I really want to see are two things. One is making sure that those leaders that have been historically told that they cannot be leaders for one reason or another are actually becoming storytellers. And then the second one is this idea. I want to change this idea that when we go to work, we have those moments where we're like, oh, I don't want to go to work. And not just because, life happens, but because you don't feel like what you do is explain as a purpose. So the companies are not explaining much to the employees why they're doing what they're doing. So yeah, that's me.
Great, thanks. Thank you. And yeah, storytelling, why is that important for leaders? What is it about
Yeah,
storytelling?
I mean, there are so many different reasons why storytelling is important for leaders. One, if we are looking at it from an internal perspective, for the leader themselves, it's about self-awareness. Every leader to lead in an effective way need to be self-aware. And when they look at storytelling, it's not just the performance of the story, so standing on the stage and doing the presentation and doing the outside thing, but it's about the work that they do within themselves to find their skills, to discover how their lived experience has impacted their leadership skills and how it's showing up in their leadership practice as well. So it's a tool for leaders to become more self-aware and to become better leaders, but it's also a tool for leaders to communicate more effectively with their team, with other senior leaders, with organizations, with clients, because we can share information and data and numbers. But when we put it in a context of stories, what science also, what research has also found is that we are much more receptive of that information. We retain the information more easily. We also focus more easily, and we will remember how we felt in that situation and we will remember the information more easily. So it's both a way for a leader to develop themselves, but it's also a way for organizations to engage employees, retain employees, to attract talent. There are so many different ways
Hmm.
storytelling can be used.
Great. Okay. And so what is your story?
Ooh. So once upon a time. So my story, I always say that people have different stories, right? We could focus on different journeys that we've been to. But in terms of how I came to storytelling. That's the story that I usually share. So I was born in Italy and my parents are from Congo. So growing up, I didn't have um, my expanded family close by. So my parents would always tell us stories of my grandparents, and they would always share all these different stories about our family. And that I think was the very first for me encounter with storytelling because I was very little. And then the more I grew up, the more I read books, the more I started writing poetry as well. And I really loved how stories would make me feel connected, but also how they will help me to articulate things better. To compress the story so that we don't go all the way into my life history. What happened after is that I loved storytelling and stories and other people's stories so much that I started working as a journalist. And I worked as a journalist for around 10 years. But the thing that happened was that the stories that I had to put out, I didn't feel that I was living my purpose in the way I was doing that. I really wanted a better connections with the communities I was interviewing. I wanted to make sure that they had a voice as well. So I started working on a documentary series on African migrants in different cities of the world. And even within that, the relationship with the people I was meeting was very much I am the journalist, I ask the questions, and you guys answer and you share your story. And there was more of a natural relationship because we would spend 1 to 3 months in each community. But still, my role was the journalist, and they were the people who I was having a conversations with. But then one day, I remember very clearly, we went to on this football field, and there were some men from the Nigerian community, and they were playing football, and we were portraying how they would do that every Sunday. And then there was one of them who asked me, "Why are you doing this?" And I gave him a little bit of, like a corporate answer. Oh, yeah, because I don't like the way migrants are portrayed in media nowadays. And I think that somebody has to do something. And then he looked at me like he wasn't really convinced of the answer. And he asked me again, yeah, but why you? And I think that question just stayed with me for a very long time. And I started asking that question to myself over and over again, why me? And the more I was trying to answer that question, the more I remember pieces of my lived experience that I had removed, the more I analyzed them, the more I understood better. And it really helped me to find exactly what I wanted to do in life in terms of work. It really helped me to increase my confidence because I had forgotten so many different things that I had achieved. And it really helped me to help others as well. That's how I became a business storytelling coach. And that's how I started working first with women of color entrepreneurs, helping them to go through the same process in less time because it took me 4 years. And then when I worked with them, one thing that I realized having a conversation with them was that the majority of them were coming from the corporate world. So I thought, well, not every leader is going to leave their job, create a business, and share their stories. So I really wanted to help them in their companies as well. And that's how I started to work with corporate organizations as well. And then now the
Great.
stories continue.
Brilliant. And yeah, so I'd like to sort of dig more into sort of storytelling. Before we
Mm.
do, I'd just like to sort of touch on the um, confusing introversion with shyness. I know a lot of introverted women leaders don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight. They're not bothered about being in the spotlight. But as you said, storytelling can help to engage teams. It can help to communicate a message more impactfully. It can help to be more influential. Um, and so, yes, let's touch on a little bit about the confusing introversion with shyness. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that? Mm.
yeah. When I was little, I wasn't a very chatty girl. I was very quiet, very, very quiet. And when if we don't tell people who we are, they're going to tell us who we are.
Mm,
So growing up, they would always tell me, "Oh, you're so quiet, you're shy, you're shy, you're shy, you're shy." So I was told I was shy for such a long time that then I started believing that I was shy. And as a result, I started behaving as if I was shy. And
mm.
then I remember I read this book, Quiet, by Susan Cain, and I had this revelation. I was like, "Oh, I'm not shy, I'm an introvert." And it was such a relief. But the thing is that society, culture, pop culture, they gave us this image of being quiet as if you are shy. But then if you really look at the meaning of the words, when someone is timid, is shy, they are afraid of the judgment of other people, right? So they fear what other people are going to say. Whereas an
Mm,
introvert, introverts can be shy, extroverts can be shy. But in terms of just being an introvert, the thing is that it takes so much energy to interact with people, and especially if it's a group of people. It's not a matter of being afraid of doing the thing, it's a matter of having the energy to
mm,
engage. And I remember so many times where I would be at gatherings with many people, and I can be there and I can interact with everyone, but then at some point I will be just depleted and very tired. And it happens sometimes that I will go back home and cry. And in the moment I would think like, oh my God, I'm going crazy. But
mm,
the thing is that for extrovert, they take energy from people. So the more people they see, the more they feel energized. For us, it's the opposite.
mm.
I mean, I don't mind meeting people. I prefer in a smaller group and I prefer the deeper conversation. But yeah, it's a matter of energy rather than, being shy. Having
Mm,
said that, obviously there can be introverts who are shy, extroverts who are shy, but for leaders who are introverts and who struggle to be um, under the spotlight, something that I always like to remind myself and remind my clients is that if you don't step under the spotlight, someone else is going to do that,
mm,
which sometimes is fine, most of the times it's not.
mm,
So it's also, as a leader, you also have a sense of responsibility. And I think the reason why oftentimes introverts leaders struggle is because the structures and the learnings and the training and the coaching are very much created around extroverts rather than introverts. So they don't necessarily have the actual tools to be storytellers, to be influential, to be visible in a way that works for them. So I know
mm.
that every time now that I do a workshop, a training session, and if we talk about storytelling, if we talk about networking, I always mention how extroverts do it and how introverts can do it so that they have the tools to do that.
Yeah, and it's great that you do that because I see oftentimes introverts who feel that or think that they have to act like the extroverts. And so
Yeah,
they put on a persona and they're acting like this extroverted character, which isn't them, but it can come across as inauthentic and it can put a lot of pressure and stress on them, like not being themselves.
yeah.
Mm,
And
yeah.
also, is it really sustainable if
No,
I
no, in the
acting for a
long
very
term,
long time?
that's right. Long term, it's not sustainable because
Yeah,
eventually it takes its toll.
yeah,
Yeah. Uh-huh. And that shyness and introversion being mistaken for shyness is something that I see time and time again. And you mentioned Susan Cain's book Quiet, um, and that came out 13 years ago. And at the time, it was quite it was very impactful because
yeah,
it helped a lot of introverts to see, well, there is nothing wrong with me, and also extroverts get a better understanding. But I think even though that was 13 years ago, we still see these challenges where people are thinking that because someone's introverted, they're shy when they're not. And as you said, as a child, when you're constantly getting those messages, you start to think that there's something wrong with you. And you grow up, and then that can then cause imposter syndrome, self-doubt, that lack of confidence that we see now. Mm. Yeah. So in terms of like someone who is introverted, is a leader, they want to be more impactful, they want to have more influence, they want to engage people more. How would you go about getting them to tell their story? What do they need to be aware of?
Aware is the right word because the very first step is not to do the work outside. There is always this idea that storytelling is the delivery of the story, stepping on the stage or telling the story. But you actually have to start working on it before you do that. So I always suggest introvert leaders to start with their own self-awareness, which means before I share any story, before I actually, the very first step is to pitch themselves for an opportunity to speak so that they have a little bit of that pressure where they have to actually do the work. And then the second thing is to actually do the work. And the work starts by looking within themselves and doing two things. From one side is about understanding what are the skills that they have right now in that moment. And that's about, understanding how they can be influential, how they can be storytellers without altering who they are. But then the second piece is looking back at their lived experience and looking at those moments where they were either visible or they've achieved something they worked on or they led other people, even if it wasn't in any official or traditional capacity, but any experience where they've done that, they I really want them to make a list of those experiences because that's something that builds the confidence. You mentioned about starting to doubt yourself when you start thinking that you're a shy person. That piece of looking at your lived experience and looking at all the things that you have achieved and all the people that you have influenced and all the goal that you have reached in any area of your life, that's the piece that gives you the confidence. That's the piece that reminds you, oh, actually, I can be myself and still I can make all these things happen. And then the part of looking at their skills. So are they very good in having one-to-one conversations? Are they very good in having intimate conversation? Is it that they prefer or they are better in writing stories? Or is it that when they present, looking at what type of leaders and storytellers they are and not what they should be, like creating their own box rather than going into another box.
Mm, right, okay. And so when it comes to storytelling, I mean, and I guess if it's something which is to do with maybe personal or um about an individual or something, it may be easier to draw on your own story and your lived
Mm.
experience to tell. But what about when it comes to something which is really like a dry topic, like presenting data or something like that? How can you build a story into it so that it's more effective? And I'll give you an example. I remember
Mhm.
years ago when
Yeah.
I was a leader in an organization and going to some health and safety training. Health and safety to me is it's a very important topic, but it can be very dry.
Yeah.
And I remember coming away, it was like a whole day coming away just feeling so drained because it had been so boring. And then I think it was about a year later, I went on some further health and safety training, and it was a different person that was delivering the training. And the person made it so engaging and brought stories into it that I actually enjoyed it, and it helped me to view health and safety in a different light because it
Yeah.
made it so engaging. So, how can someone make a dry topic where it's very much about the data into a story?
It's, it's interesting that you have this memory of the two different trainings because then you can go back and think, okay, what did the second person do differently? And
Mm-hmm.
then you start taking notes, right? So you start taking notes on, okay, this person did this at this moment because, and I remember having this conversation with the strategy and transformation team, and they deal with, I was delivering a workshop for them on this exact topic, and they deal with, numbers and this strategy for the next 10 years and
Mm-hmm.
data, 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 data. So what I always suggest are two things. The first one is to focus on the audience. So the audience might not need all the data in the presentation itself, right? So they might need, especially if you are in the strategy and transformation team, which isn't always the case, but the audience might need an idea of the data, and then they need you to bring the information to life. And then the rest, the details can go into, like into a report or in a separate document if they want to look at it further. But usually presentation don't last for like 3 hours where you can really present the entire set of data. So that's one thing, to focus on the audience and understanding how they receive the information and what are the pieces of information that they need from you live in the moment, and what
Mm-hmm.
are the information that they will need later or to look at and to expand on later. And then the second thing is that even when you present data or you present a topic that is unfortunately dry, you don't always have to create a story on everything. But what you can do, you can put hints of stories within the presentation. We are engaged with anyone in the very first few seconds, right? So at the very beginning, instead of simply introducing what you're going to do, you can share a story. It can be, I'm thinking about this team, for instance, they had to travel to India um, to collect some data. So one story can be about the trip and how you got there. One story can be about the reason why this data is being created. So where is it coming from in terms of what was the reasoning behind it? One story can be a personal story related to what you're going to present, and that's the just the how you start, like something brief at the very beginning, and then you start presenting the data, and then you want to give a rhythm to the presentation. So you start with a story right away so that people are engaged and interested immediately, then you share the data, then you share another bits of another story. And it can be something about, I'm thinking about health and safety as well, something that would happen if you don't follow some health and safety policies. And
Mm-hmm.
not in a scary or, horror movie kind of way, but just maybe a story of something that happened when someone didn't follow the health and safety policies. And it can be something funny, it can be something that you have reflected on, it can be something that you have experienced. It doesn't really matter because the goal is to keep the engagement up so that you have story, data, story, data, story, data, and then you finish with another story. And all of these, I can already hear all the leaders being like, yeah, but we cannot share stories that long. But those little stories don't need to be long stories. They can be very short. It can be one sentence, two sentences. But the goal is to make sure that people are engaged, and they can
Mm-hmm.
also, in a way, visualize what you're talking about. It's not just the numbers, but they can see what the numbers represent, what they mean, and they can
Mm-hmm.
see a little bit more into it.
Right. And is there a like a formula to what makes a good story? Like, I don't know. And I know a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Um, so, but is there anything more that people need to think of other than the beginning, middle, and the end?
Yeah, yeah. It's This is something that we often share during the workshops that we do on storytelling, and it's something that I also mention in my book. But the story, because I've worked in stories for such a long time and from so many different angles, what I realize is that storytelling and sharing a compelling story is about the structure of the story and making it clear, but there are also other elements like the audience, like making sure that the story is engaging and the audience is engaged, or making sure that the story is personal. And when I say personal, it's not about just personal for yourself, it's really about answering three questions, one of the three questions. So you can share, why do you care? Why does the leader care? Why does the audience care? Or it can be, why does the organization care? And then when you articulate that, you tap into the purpose and into the values, into the more personal part that really helps the audience to connect on a personal level. So there are different things beside the structure. Also, because once you start practicing storytelling, and you first have to to start with the basis. But then once you really know the structure, you can really change it. So yes, stories needs to have a beginning, a middle part, and then in the end. But then if you when you craft the stories even more, when you're really used to it, you can start with the end and then go to the middle and then finish with the beginning of the story. So you can really play around with that. But let's start with with baby steps.
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing actually when I never really used to consider myself a storyteller, but
Mm,
I think that I probably do now build it in when I'm delivering talks or workshops, building stories, particularly given the work that I do, stories of clients' experiences so
mm,
that it relates to the audience so they can relate to a particular challenge and then what helped a particular client get through that particular challenge. I find that to be quite effective. And also sharing my personal experience as well and bringing that in. Mm,
it's
yeah.
interesting. I mean, I don't want to go into coaching, but I always like to ask myself, but also leaders I work with, why? Like, why, even when it comes just to the word being a leader, why was it that you didn't feel that you were a storyteller?
Mm.
Because that's
Why didn't I
really,
go? Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess it's because I guess sort of growing up, I lacked confidence. I lacked belief in myself. And I guess it probably stems from that and thinking, well, I've got nothing of interest to share. But then as I got to know myself and also to be more of myself, and I think it's a combination of that, getting to know and understand myself better, being more of my
Mhm.
authentic self, and having that belief and confidence in myself, and then recognizing, yeah, I have got lots of stories to tell. Mm,
Yeah. And often, so often, it really goes back to childhood, to
mm,
what we what we saw and what we thought about ourselves, because I had a very similar experience growing up. I never thought of myself as a leader
mm,
because I was quiet. But then I don't know if it ever happened to you, but if you think about it, we we gave ourselves these characteristics, right? So I was quiet, so I cannot be a leader. But if we look at it, like looking at it now, when you think about it, it's not your characteristic, is what you are seeing outside. So because you don't see quiet leaders, you think that you cannot be a leader because you're quiet.
Mm.
So I don't know. I always like to see the issue from the other side, like whether is it me or is it them? Is it how I am or is it how it is portrayed?
Mm.
Because even for being a storyteller, um, it feels like, oh, you have to exude this kind of confidence. And then we have an idea of what confidence looks like. But, everything can show up in different ways.
That's right. And we often have a mistaken view that because someone is extroverted, they speak a lot, they take up a lot of space, that that is confident. But it's, as you say, confidence shows up in many different ways. And for me, confidence is having the courage to do, having that belief in myself and having the courage to do all that I need to do. That for me is confidence. Whether
Yeah.
that shows up loud and blah, 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 or whether that shows up in a quiet way, like how I do. Mm,
Yeah, 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 definitely.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
also confidence in, I liked what you said, that you mentioned that you started to be more of yourself. For me, that's one of the highest ways of being confident, because confidence, it's not something that we have to demonstrate to others necessarily. It's
Mm,
also about who actually I'm confident enough that I can be myself.
mm,
That's very powerful, and it's so important for introverted leaders, for who wants to also be storytellers, to try and find that confidence. Because when you are a storyteller will lose energy and give it to others, right? Because storytelling, sharing a story, for me, it's one of the greatest act of kindness. So you are giving something to others. So when you're giving something to others, you also have to be mindful of, okay, what do I need? How am I, so that I know that I give to others, but then I'm not just depleted and, crying out somewhere. What do I need? How can I give to myself as well? Those are all
mm.
pieces that are really needed. Do I want to spend like 2 days at home without interacting with any human being? That's fine.
And I think that is very important what you said there. It's about giving something to others. And I think when we look at it from that perspective, so that that aren't bothered about being in the spotlight because it can be energy draining. They don't necessarily promote themselves because it doesn't feel natural for them. But looking at it from that perspective, it's about giving something to others and sort of shift that focus from yourself
Mhm.
onto to what it is that you're doing, and to, as you said, giving something to others and adding value and making a difference and making an impact. Mm. So
Yeah.
tell us about your book.
Yes. So for a very long time, I had, when you have a mix, you also wrote a book, so you will understand. You have a mix of ideas that you really want to bring into the world, but then you need order to to actually give them to others. So for the past couple of years, that's what I've been focusing on. I've been focusing on putting order into how I help leaders to tell their stories. And the frameworks that I use in training sessions or coaching sessions were always there, but it was a matter of, okay, how do I offer this to people with whom I cannot have a coaching session, like they're not going to have an actual longer conversation with me. So the book is called Lead with Your Story, and it's about looking at helping leaders to look at their lived experience and not thinking, oh, I don't have anything to share about it, or I can, it's too dark, I cannot share it, or I don't know where to start from, it's not relevant. But, looking at the lived experience, and instead of thinking all the reason why they shouldn't, looking at that and thinking, oh, these are all the things that my lived experience has given me, and how I'm bringing some of these things into my leadership role. And it's specifically, I wrote this book specifically for leaders who have been historically told that they cannot be leaders for one reason or another. And the reason why I wanted to write this book was really to help them to step outside of what leadership and storytelling is often portrayed to be. So oftentimes when you see courses, training, and workshops and books around leadership or around storytelling, you see when it comes to leadership, it's oftentimes the case that, answer this quiz and you will know what your leadership style is. And it can be a good starting point, but in a way, it forces leaders who have been historically told to be quiet, to be hidden, to not to be loud. It's a way to tell them, okay, now you are into this other box. So you are this kind of leader because you answer this quiz. So the book for me is a way to help them understand you don't necessarily need to fit into this box. You can just create your own way of being a leader. And then from the other side is about storytelling. Storytelling, we mentioned before when we talk about story, is about the delivery of the story, the structure of the story. And that's what books tend to talk about over and over and over again. And yes, it's helpful. Yes, you have to practice it. But at some point, we have to understand that storytelling is not just delivering the story, it's also the work that you do before, so that you are A, ready to share the stories, and B, you know what are the stories that you want to share. So the book looks at leadership and storytelling, but it looks at it from a completely different perspective from what I've seen in so far in corporate organizations, in other literature on leadership and storytelling. And within that, I share both my story, I share the story of my clients, I share frameworks that leaders can use so that they can start. It's a little bit like a self-coaching book in a way, so that they can start to do the work, so that they can start to be self-aware, to find their stories, to understand how to present it, to have tips and things like that. Yeah. And it's
Yeah,
coming out in October 2025.
October.
Yeah.
Great. And so, if people are interested and want to find out more, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, they can come on my website, which is beatricekabutakapua.com, and there is a section on the book. And when they go on that session, they can simply, I can share the link with you as well, but they can simply register to the newsletter and they will follow the entire journey of the book.
Hmm, great. Yes, and we will put the link in the show notes as well so that people can get it easily. Oh, this has been a very interesting
Yes.
conversation, and stories are can be so impactful and make a big difference between being influential and having an impact and not. So thank you, Beatrice. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. I did too.
And so, listeners, do go to Beatrice's website and follow the journey of her book, and be ready when the book comes out in October to get her book. So, yes, go and follow her on LinkedIn as well. And if you are wanting to increase your confidence, influence, and impact, if you haven't completed the free assessment on my website, go to aboundingsolutions.com. Under the free resources, there's an assessment that you can complete that will give you ideas about areas that you can focus on. And so, until the next time, bye.